Everybody knows the Denver Broncos offense needs to step up in a big way, but some injuries with this team could impact some personnel decisions for Sunday's matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll highlight that and much more here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined as always by Sayre, Bedinger, site expert, predominantly orange.com. Thanks once again to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks for tuning in, making us your first listen. You can get this show for free wherever you get your podcasts, or available on YouTube. So make sure you hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. And what's going on with your favorite team here today, there's a lot to break down as the team prepares for their 2-game road trip on the East Coast. Starting things off with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we'll go over keys to victory, things we want to see in Sunday's game here for the Broncos offense, and hopefully an offensive production and offensive unit that can move the ball effectively. That is one thing everyone's hoping for here. But on top of that, matchups that could make or break this game here in Sunday's big-time AFC versus NFC showdown. But more importantly, injuries have impacted this team in the last week and a half. How might that impact some personnel decisions Sunday, and also maybe in the long term? We're going to kick things off here with that on today's episode of the show, which is also brought to you by our friends by Prize Picks, where you can go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. Sayre, my friend, injuries. I know you highlighted some of the ones that have been very important to monitor throughout this week, with Mike McGlinchey going on IR. What does that mean? We know that Alex Palczewski will start in his place over the course in which McGlinchey is out, guaranteed to be at least 4 weeks since he's now on IR. But as the team now prepares for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday, the injury report starting to iron itself out a little bit, and quite a few names on that list that we'll have to monitor and maybe look at. If this person doesn't play, where does Denver go from there?
And starting with, I think, one of the most important guys in Baron Browning, who is a starter on the defense, Cody, and somebody that you and I talked about this offseason as potentially being one of the bigger breakout candidates on this team. And through the first 2 weeks of the season, we've really seen Jonathan Cooper be that guy off the edge who, hey, we talk about both of these guys came in the same NFL draft class back in 2021. They're both in a contract year this year. We've started to see that 2021 class get a little bit of love from the front office in terms of extensions. And it's Jonathan Cooper with 2 sacks, 4 quarterback hits, a couple of tackles for loss. And obviously, Baron Browning's production just hasn't quite been the same. No quarterback hits and 5 tackles, 1 tackle for loss in the first 2 games of the season. So Baron Browning going down with a foot injury against Pittsburgh, honestly, is just a little bit more unfortunate, like you kind of teased, in that long-term aspect, because you hoped that he could develop into a long-term fixture off the edge. Unfortunately, fortunately, it looks like the Broncos are getting one. Jonathan Cooper really developing into that. But unfortunately for Baron Browning, it might not be his time this year for the Broncos.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, Barron's a guy who we all know is supremely athletic, supremely talented, has some elite level traits to him. But the biggest thing that has impacted him negatively has just been injuries. And part of me is starting to wonder, has it been more so injuries relative to playing outside linebacker versus when he was playing inside linebacker? And not sure. I mean, I think the demands of each position are definitely different, but that's another conversation for another day. It's not looking like Barron will play in Sunday's game against obviously the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Baker Mayfield, Tristan Wirfs, and that offense that, hey, they're a little fun to watch right now in Tampa Bay. They're having more fun right down there with the cannons firing off than Broncos Country is right now with Denver's offense. But if Barron is unable to go, which really the writing has been on the wall, I know Mike McGlinchey was the IR move to make that possible, but Dondre Tillman now being promoted to the active roster, I think speaks to maybe the idea that maybe Barron's going to miss some time here, and there's a chance that Barron himself could end up on injured reserve. We're just not sure what the timeline is. We know we had an MRI. We don't know the results. There hasn't been anything that has come out necessarily regarding him. But I think you look at the tea leaves, Dondre Tillman being promoted to the active roster. Okay, now Denver, they have 4 pass rushers right now with Barron being out. And then you have Andrew Farmer, who you added to the practice squad earlier. So if you need another guy there, you can promote him from, a game day elevation from the practice squad. But I think it's going to be Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito this weekend as the two starters. And then you're going to see Jonah Ellis, the rookie, who's been sensational. And I think Dondre Tillman in that rotational role there with those two guys behind the starters. That seems more likely at this point. And hey, it gives the Broncos a chance to look at some of their young guys here. You get a little bit more of an extensive look, with Nick Bonito as a starter. You get an extensive look as your rookie guy that has been impressive throughout the entire offseason in Ellis. And then, a developmental guy that you're very high on in Dondre Tillman. So the future is now for the Broncos. They're going to have a chance to evaluate that. Also, maybe even at the tight end position, because you look past this year, the tight end position doesn't have a very big outlook in terms of guys returning next season. We all know Greg Dulcich and Adam Troutman, both guys have popped up on the injury report this week. More than likely, both are going to play. Saw them during Thursday's practice. But in the opportunity or in the situation here where maybe something's lingering for one of these two guys here, is it time to maybe see Lucas Kroll get elevated instead of, obviously deactivated on game day? Is it time to see him in his first regular season action of the year? Or could the Broncos elevate practice squad tight end Donald Parham Jr., who obviously has some significant regular season history with the member of the Los Angeles Chargers? Some interesting scenarios here for Denver to work with.
Yeah, and Parham also played for Joe Lombardi when he was with the Chargers there, so it's not like he doesn't know the offense here. I mean, I know it's not exactly all Joe Lombardi's offense, but should be pretty familiar with him. Should be pretty easy for him to get up to speed if the Broncos want to try something out, because, look, we saw Greg Dulcich drop a couple passes last weekend. We saw Nate Adkins drop a pass. Adam Troutman hasn't caught a pass, as far as I know, this season so far, Cody. So it's one of those situations where it's like, let's just try some stuff and see what works, because right now nothing's working. And if you're willing to call up Lil Jordan Humphrey, why not Donald Parham, who's got, I can't remember exactly how many career touchdowns, but it's more than most of the guys, if not everybody at that tight end room combined right now. So I would love to see what he's got in the tank at this point. And somebody who brings a little bit of size, a little bit of playmaking ability. Give your rookie quarterback that big catch radius out there. Why not? And the same with Lucas Kroll, quite honestly. I know that everybody's kind of worried about the run blocking stuff, and I would be too, because, hey, the Broncos, they need to start running the ball well. But Greg Dulcich has been splitting out, playing basically wide receiver. From the stuff that I've been watching, Cody, on film, Dulcich is basically playing a big slot role. So why would you not try other guys in that role? I would just say, hey, those guys are going to be capable enough blocking from a big slot position to be able to throw them into the mix and see what they can do, and give your quarterback that catch radius. I wouldn't say give up on Dulcich right away just yet, but maybe activate those guys at one at a time even, and just see what you've got there in terms of, hey, we design a couple of plays, get these guys involved. Instead of throwing to Nate Adkins or instead of throwing to Adam Troutman, let's throw to Parham and see what can. You're 32nd in the red zone right now. How could a 6'8" tight end really hurt you in that area?
Yeah, I mean, you might as well try something, because what you have been trying simply hasn't been working here for Sean Payton and the Broncos offense. And that's definitely been a little bit of a frustrating pain point. There's certainly a lot we can discuss on that here as the season goes on. Denver with an 0-2 start in the year, not ideal. But maybe some good news in terms of the injury side. John Franklin Myers, maybe he progresses enough to play here on Sunday, going through the concussion protocol. Saw him during Thursday's practice in Dove Valley, so something to keep an eye on there. If not, Malcolm Roach will step up and get the start, and then very curious to see who they rotate behind him at that point. I mean, you could see maybe Matt Henningsen being a practice squad elevation just because Denver needs some depth there, or maybe Inyoma Uwazurike becomes activated for the first time this regular season. Something to watch out for there. Wide receivers Josh Reynolds, Devon Vele continued to practice despite being limited with ribs, with an Achilles injury that's been bothering him. I think those guys are going to play here this week. I think the bigger question is Lil Jordan Humphrey going to be activated, once again here. Not sure what Denver's plan is or what they're going to do here, but obviously some personnel moves could be coming in the next day or so that maybe determine what Denver's plan is at the wide receiver position going forward. We'll keep an eye on that. But, really the injury side of things, Denver, it's unfortunate. But, Sayre, I think there's a drastic point here. While injuries stink, they're part of the game. And now Denver and the coaching staff, they have to find a way to adjust and adapt. And certainly it doesn't get easy when you face some tough defensive-minded teams the way that Denver is here. And speaking of defense, really the Broncos' keys to victory this week in terms of matchups that we have our eye on, a lot of the matchups are going to fall on Denver's defensive side of the ball as opposed to Denver's offense. We'll highlight the big ones and tell you why PS2 versus Mike Evans could be must-see TV. We'll highlight that much more here on today's episode. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now through September 22nd, yes, time is running out on it. All FanDuel customers have an opportunity to get a 3-week free trial to NFL Sunday Ticket through YouTube and YouTube TV. All customers can place a $5 bet and you can get access to a NFL Sunday Ticket free trial for 3 weeks through YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game like the Broncos traveling on the road this weekend to take on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If you're out of market, you can catch that game with NFL Sunday Ticket. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and then you can cancel at any time. Make sure you check it out. Just visit FanDuel.com today to download America's #1 sportsbook. Once again, that's FanDuel.com. Download America's #1 sportsbook.
We know the Denver Broncos offense needs to get back on track against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but that defense, they're going to need to carry this team if the Broncos are going to win in week 3 in Tampa Bay. Cody and I are going to break down some defensive matchups that could make or break this week for the Denver Broncos and be the difference between 1-2 or 0-3. Hey, for every one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, we appreciate you so much. And if you haven't done so already, we'd appreciate it even more if you go ahead, hit subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube, as well as we break down this week 3 matchup. And you know your boys Cody and Sayre will be here for you every single day covering all things Denver Broncos. Let's cover the matchups that could make or break this game, Cody, because like you mentioned and like you teased, it really does. We know the offensive side of the ball, like, yes, those guys, they're going to have to get back on track. Like we're basically starting from the bottom and working our way back up in every phase, whether it's the passing game, whether it's the running game, whether it's blocking, whether it's, the running backs doing their thing. Doesn't matter what we're talking about. The offense, we know all those guys have to get back on track. But defensively, the Broncos have been actually quite good this season. And there are some key matchups in this game that, hey, if the Broncos can win these individual matchups, they may be able to mess around and go into Tampa Bay and play a little bit of spoiler here in week 3.
Yeah, and what a great challenge too, because I think this is Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense. They're revitalized a little bit. Baker Mayfield is playing some of the best football of his career. Granted, it's 2 weeks in, but man, he's confident. 73.6% completion percentage so far. 5 touchdowns to 1 interception. He's dealing and diming, and guess who he's dealing and diming to? Well, Rachaad White out of the backfield, seeing a large volume of targets. But really, Chris Godwin is, in my opinion, right now, when you look at volume, you look at how he's being used in the offense, playing a lot in the slot. Chris Godwin right now is enemy #1, and part of me is wondering, like, is it going to be PS2 versus Mike Evans or PS2 versus Chris Godwin? Well, I think if they're going to keep Chris Godwin in the slot in certain situations, I'm curious to know how Jim Leonard, Vance Joseph, Sean Payton are approaching this game, right? Like ideally on paper, I think you'd look at it as, okay, hey, Mike Evans is 6'5". Patrick Surtain, is probably the only guy here that can really kind of match up against his size a little bit because he's, he is tall for a corner, but he's also got really elite athleticism there. And so I think that would be a fun matchup to watch. But then Godwin, fully healthy in the slot, is a little bit of a problem. He's their leading receiver right now with 200 yards. And, he's got 15 catches on 16 targets in 2 games. So he's playing with a lot of confidence. He's fully healthy right now. They have 2 really good receivers. And then you have the rookie wide receiver, Jalen McMillan out of Washington that, is not playing a large volume role. But, he had a catch in 1 game for 32 yards. He's a downfield threat for you. Cade Otton, a tight end. Rachaad White out of the backfield here. To me, I'm first off looking at PS2 versus Mike Evans. I think that's going to be the matchup to watch here. This is a tough one for me, Sayre, because look, we know PS2 is very capable and I think is going to thrive in terms of following opposing teams' #1 guys. But the reason this is a challenge is because I think that Tampa Bay Buccaneers have 2 #1 guys, and each one presents different attributes there. PS2's been flagged quite a bit this season, which has been a little bit of an odd development. Some of them I think are warranted, but then there's been a handful of penalties too. I'm like, that's just PS2 playing defense. Like he's got equal right to the football as the offensive guy does. So kind of 50-50 in terms of how the flags are, but Mike Evans, big physical target. Part of me can't, discount that maybe the penalty factor could also play a role in Sunday's game here.
Well, they're going to certainly try. I think that that's what you might as well do that, right? You might as well take shots downfield and see, is he going to play clean coverage or are they going to throw a flag? Because they have been throwing those flags. And I think the letters that PS2 used to describe some of those penalties, I believe, were B and S, Cody. And I think he said that after the game or something like that, but in a humble way, as only he can. Some of them were BS, but then he said some of them, he could have probably had better technique or whatever. But I'm excited for this as well. I was talking with James of Locked On Bucks about these matchups potentially, and he was wondering, like, are the Broncos going to put PS2 in the slot potentially? And I just wonder, like, how long are they going to allow Jaquan McMillan to do his thing out there? Because I feel like the Broncos are probably pretty confident in Jaquan McMillan playing in the slot. Now, if he starts giving up a bunch of big plays against Chris Godwin, then I think you make a switch. But I think you go into this game believing that Jaquan McMillan, who's been one of your best on ball, like he's one of the best when the ball's in the air, he makes plays on the ball. So I feel like he's going to be able to, at least go into this matchup. Jim Leonard, the defensive backs coach and pass game coordinator, and Vance Joseph, the defensive coordinator. You come into this game believing that Jaquan McMillan can do his thing in the slot, and you make the adjustment if necessary.
Yeah, and look, part of me is also wondering too, let's say that does happen where Denver's getting hurt a little bit more from Godwin in the slot. Okay, maybe you do make that change. You put Surtain on him, but you put Riley against Mike Evans. That's going to be an interesting matchup. Do you move Jaquan McMillan to the outside, to play the other cover whoever else is not, there? Like, to me, that's going to be a challenge. I don't know if you want to put Jaquan on Mike Evans because the size is a little different. Jaquan's, I think, maybe a half an inch or an inch taller than me. And so you look at that, and I'm like, hey, like 6'5" versus that, as great of a cover guy as Jaquan is, we've seen Mike Evans go up and get those 60-40 balls at a consistent rate. I mean, Mike Evans is, in my opinion, on a little bit of an underrated potential Hall of Fame career with how he's been producing at a consistent level, despite some of the quarterback changes they've had. But I think that really kind of factors into everything right here going through one guy, right? We talk so much about the quarterback position in today's NFL. You talk about guys cooking. Baker Mayfield against the Broncos defense, the last time that these guys play, like the last time that Denver, granted, there's some guys who are still on this roster that played against Baker a couple years ago on Christmas, but Baker was serving platters left and right, dishing and diming, and Denver couldn't do anything against him because he's very good at the quick passing game, but he's also underrated in terms of his mobility. Sayre, I think, everyone's like, oh, well, Baker, he can throw, he can short the intermediate, he can throw the middle of the field. But it's when plays break down, Baker's still very good at gigging outside the pocket, using his legs to pick up a first down. I mean, 8 carries so far this season for 55 yards. 4 of those 8 carries have been chain movers, leading to a first down here to extend a Tampa Bay drive. And they're coming off of a big road win against the Detroit Lions. Like, this is a tough matchup here for the Broncos, no matter how you slice it. I think the defense has their hands full a lot more than Denver's offense has their hands full with Tampa's defense, considering some of the injuries those guys have over there.
Well, and even as we sit here today, Vance Joseph, the Broncos defensive coordinator, just said he feels like Baker Mayfield is playing the best he's ever seen him play. And I would tend to agree with that. I think you get year one in Tampa Bay, even though you make a change at offensive coordinator this offseason with Dave Canales, obviously leaving to go coach the Carolina Panthers, and then Liam Cohen coming in. It creates one of those situations where you're kind of like, man, can Baker sustain? Like, was Dave Canales the I guess the straw that stirs the drink, so to speak? But Baker looks like he's just kind of progressed as a player, and he's got into a healthy situation with a lot of good players around him, a defense that backs him up. I think that's one of the key things as well in this, Cody, is that, like, right now, Baker's doing a little bit more than I feel like he had to do last year, because the Bucs running game is not quite there at this point. And that may be something that, as we're talking about the Broncos exploiting defensive matchups, that may be an area where the Broncos can gain a little bit of an edge here in this game, is continuing to shut down that Bucs running game, keeping them one-dimensional, and hopefully your defense on the back end can force a few more turnovers, because, man, you've got the playmakers in that area. You've got the guys that can provide the pressure in obvious passing situations. Can you keep the Bucs running game at bay in this game with that defensive line? And hopefully somebody like John Franklin Myers being able to play, we don't know that quite yet, but you just hope you can have a fully loaded front to be able to keep them one-dimensional.
Well, and you also have to pray, too, that the offense can do something with the possessions that Denver's defense gives back to them in special teams. Defense, special teams really have been the bright spots of this team so far this season in Denver. And the offense, they're still trying to figure it out, find their footing. And look, on schedule, you look at it on paper, 2 tough East Coast games back to back. Denver's not coming back to Denver until after the New York Jets game. So really, they're leaving Friday for Tampa Bay, and they won't be back until I believe it's Raiders week. So at that point, that's a couple weeks away. And so maybe this the road trip will help these guys get a little bit closer, but also maybe it gives them some renewed sense of purpose, because 0-2 doesn't feel good. 0-3 certainly wouldn't feel good. And coming back 0-4 in front of your home crowd, you're going to wear the throwbacks for the first time, week 5 against the Raiders. You don't want that, because the Raiders have been a very, very tough opponent for Denver. So right now, focus on one game at a time here, but these are going to be the matchups I think that are going to define the outcome of this game. Broncos Country, let us know your thoughts on PS2 versus Mike Evans. Patrick, I mean, you look at Jaquan McMillan, Riley Moss, potentially against Chris Godwin whenever that matchup does arise, and Denver trying to slow down Baker Mayfield. A lot of these are going to play into Denver's keys to victory, things we want to see, and a lot of things that we want to see is better offensive production here in week 3. How can Denver do that? We simplify it, but even if we simplify it, it ain't that easy. We'll tell you why here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks, and Prize Picks is daily fantasy sports done right. Prize Picks is America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Prize Picks, they're the easiest and the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, and unlike other apps, on Prize Picks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in, where you can win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks inside of the Prize Picks app. So check it out today. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. We can all acknowledge that the Broncos have to find a way to run the football if they hope to have a chance to win games this upcoming season. We're not even getting to the number of games that they could or that they should win this year. 0-2 has definitely put a little bit of a dark cloud over Broncos Country, and a lot of it has to stem with the offense. So while we get into the cliches of what the offense has to do, we're also going to say thanks once again to everyone at Broncos Country for tuning in and making us your first listen every single day. We appreciate you so much, Broncos Country. Whether the team's winning, whether they're losing, we love what we get to do, interacting with all of you and bringing you level-headed, objective, down-the-middle coverage of all things Denver Broncos related. You can't get that anywhere else, so make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Sayre, keys to victory, things we want to see. I think the first and foremost thing that Denver has to do, let's focus on the offense here. I kind of wanted to make this point a little bit earlier, didn't have the final time before actually getting to the first key here. It's interesting. You look at some of the parallels, and look, doesn't have anything that has substantial meaning in the long run, but last year, you look at how Denver started the season, right? Remember week 2 against the Commanders, they wore the white jersey at home. Week 3, they're on the road in Florida against the Miami Dolphins. They wear the orange jersey. Well, what are they doing this Sunday? They're on the road here, week 3, wearing the orange jersey. We are just praying you don't see a 70-20 output the way that it was last year, considering, how things have started here for Denver. I think the defense is substantially better. I don't think that's going to happen. But part of it is making sure you don't let Baker Mayfield preheat the oven and where he can cook, because he's got the weapons, he's got the personnel offensively to do so. I think that's going to be crucial for the Broncos if they want to win. How they do that, though, is going to be a challenge.
It really is, and it starts with running the ball. I mean, that's what is going to win in today's NFL, I think, Cody, in terms of just like, hey, you want to sling the ball around the yard. Obviously, you want to make sure that you've got a quarterback that can go out there and win you games on his own if need be. But before you get to that point, I mean, you have to make sure that your offense has some serious balance. Like, your quarterback is only going to be able to benefit from having a complementary roster if you actually have a complementary roster. The Broncos have not run the ball well at all in the first 2 weeks of the season. I've got the numbers here, Cody. They're worse than you would think, based on the fact that Bo Nix has added some pretty significantly good runs to the mix. 44 carries, 163 yards, good for 3.7 yards per attempt. When you look at Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin this season, they are averaging a combined 2.3 yards per carry on 32 total attempts, whereas the Broncos defensively, they've given up 287 rushing yards. And I understand a good chunk of that is from, Geno Smith had a big run. Justin Fields had a couple of decent runs against him. So we know that it's not all the running backs that are running all over the Broncos, but I would go so far as to say whoever has more rushing yards in this game between the Broncos and Bucs could be the team that wins. It may be as simple as that.
Well, and when you look at it too, you mentioned earlier, Tampa Bay struggling massively. I mean, you look at where they're at in terms of being able to run the football early on here. You look at offensive rankings, they're averaging 91 yards on the ground, which right now is 24th in the NFL. And you're like, okay, hey, 91 yards, that's not much. But you look at Denver, they're 81.5. So it's bad for both sides. And granted, you look at Tampa Bay, they played week 1. They played the Washington Commanders there, and that was kind of a little bit of a shootout at one point. But then you look at the Lions game, like they faced a tough Lions defense, and they went into Detroit and they did all that without a run game, which to me is a little bit surprising. And a lot of their production in the run game has really come from Baker Mayfield. I mean, as I mentioned, 8 carries so far through 2 games, 55 yards. He's finding ways to use his legs there, but they're also making a lot of explosive plays in the passing game there with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin being the benefactor there, and obviously, McMillan being another guy out of there that's getting there. But Rashad White is their 3rd leading receiver, 80 yards so far out of the backfield in 2 games. So while the run game isn't there, the running back is still hurting a Buccaneers opposing team. So that's where Denver's going to have to buckle down. And I think as well, too, for Denver, being able to run the ball. I think we got to ask ourselves the question here, Sarah, as we go through here. If Denver's run game, because Javonte finished, I think, last week against the Steelers with 1.3 yards per carry, that's simply not good enough, and not at all. And the inability to run the ball is hurting the Broncos, and it is putting a lot on Bo Nix, who has the 3rd most passing attempts right now in the National Football League after 2 weeks. That is not a winning formula here. And look, while obviously Bo Nix deserves his fair share of criticism for some of the offensive struggles, I mean, what else do you want him to do when you don't have a run game? The common denominator here, and I thought you broke it down perfectly this week when I was out, was maybe the Broncos offense has a little bit of a Sean Payton problem. How does Sean adjust to this is the biggest question here. Could this be the week we maybe see a change? If the run game isn't going, do we see a benching and maybe somebody else take over as the starter? Something to maybe keep an eye on here. But part of that, Sarah, I think, is simplifying the offense. That to me is one of the keys I wrote down here. How has Sean simplified the offense this week, not just for Bo Nix, but just for the offense in general? And how does he simplify it for him going into this game? I think that's a huge key, and it's a huge question.
There's a great clip that was circulating after Monday Night Football of Peyton Manning and Matt Ryan and Eli Manning breaking down Monday Night Football. They're watching Kirk Cousins have a comeback drive to win the game against the Philadelphia Eagles, right? And they were talking about, like, hey, you know what's nice when you're with a new team and you get into 2-minute offense is that you're running the bread and butter stuff, the stuff that from day one you installed it. It's like your favorite plays. And we've heard Sean Payton say throughout the offseason, he's asking the quarterbacks like, hey, what are your favorite plays? Let's run some of these things. I just can't help but wonder, a lot of people are saying, well, Bo Nix, he put up a bunch of numbers in garbage time situations. And I can't help but wonder if it's, okay, is it garbage time or are they actually running the stuff that Bo is really comfortable with in the offense? It's not just, we're not only seeing Bo move the ball against prevent defense, as some people on Twitter or X would have you believe. I think there's some meat to what obviously Peyton Manning and Matt Ryan and Eli Manning are saying about, hey, you're running a brand new offense. Sometimes when you get into that 2-minute and you're able to run the stuff that like the back of your hand, it's just like for me, playing songs and performing songs that I know really well is much, much easier. And I'm able to lead out those songs much, much better as opposed to songs that I don't know, that I need to like look at the lyrics, I need to look at the chords, or I need to remember the transitions here or there. Like there's a comparison to be made with running an NFL offense like this where you're overcomplicating stuff. And I think that maybe the Broncos should get into more of that, like you said, simplifying, get to the bread and butter without being predictable, because that's something else that they have been through the first 2 games.
I haven't had a chance to talk about this week because everything that was going on, but I would say the one thing I have noticed is that with the offense through 2 weeks of play, going back and watching all 22, Denver isn't doing a lot of the stuff that myself and so many other reporters at practice have seen the offense do. And I can't get into specifics because in case Denver somehow breaks it out, I don't want this podcast being the one place that's, hey, it came out on this one. But we can just say here, some of the, like the formations, some of the designs, some of the concepts pre-snap, We have not seen a single ounce of that from what we've seen in the training camp practices and some of the OTA practices, specifically with Bo Nix. So part of me is wondering, why haven't the Broncos gotten to that point yet? You know, all the times in practice, we're like, hey, we're re-going over our install that we did in April for this session. Like, we're going through it again here. How come we haven't seen some of these things that we've seen at practice that look like they mesh well with the current team and the personnel that this team has? Granted, practice and everything else like that, the observation factor on that's different, because how Bo has played and how the offense has played has been so drastically different than what I have seen them in practice all off season long, Sayre. And I think to me, that's been the most puzzling thing. And because Broncos fans tune in to you and I talk about this and other people, and they're like, well, you guys hyped them up. You guys did this. We're going off of what we've seen. And I can tell you here today, some of the things we've seen with Denver's offense with Bo Nix at quarterback, haven't seen them run that at all in any of the regular season games. To me, that's a little bit puzzling, and I'm trying to figure out, it's like a mystery. Why? Big old question mark here on the screen as we continue about our day Lockdown Broncos. But if Denver wants to win, they have to embrace this road trip. They're going to be road underdogs. They're going to be underdogs in a lot of games this season, maybe even the rest of the season, until they get a convincing win or they start showing signs of progression here. A lot of it's going to be on the offensive side of the ball, and Denver's going to have their hands full offensively. They're going to have their hands full defensively. How's it going to swing in terms of them winning? Well, we're going to tune in on Sunday. The Broncos kick off on the road against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 11 a.m. Mountain Time, an East Coast time game in Florida, where they'll be breaking out the orange uniforms. Hopefully a better Week 3 outcome this year for Denver than what they had last year. And look, one thing we can guarantee, Sayre, Bedinger, myself, we're going to have you covered with the Lockdown Broncos post-game report immediately following the game here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. With that said, Broncos Country, thanks for rocking with us all week long here. 0-2 is not where they want to be. Sayre Bedinger and myself, trust me, we want the team to be competitive. We want them to win. It's fun when they win. But obviously there's a lot of things that they're working on still, and we'll be here every step of the way as the team hopefully gets back to that point. We'll see you following the game on Sunday.